or good afternoon, depending where you're joining us from. I am Marianne Schörling, and it's my pleasure to open today's webinar. Now, in a second, before we start the official part, you probably have seen as you are joining us now that we are recording this session. We are recording because we will upload the recording later on our YouTube channel. And we kindly ask you at this point to turn off your cameras if you don't want to be recorded. We also kindly ask you to mute yourself when you are not speaking. And in a second, we will be sharing the link to our YouTube channel so that you can subscribe and also re-listen to today's recording. Let me show the next slide. So, yeah, on behalf of the Geneva Macro Lab team, a warm welcome to our webinar with the title, Creating Triple Wins Through Sustainable Investment. I will lead you through the next 60 minutes alongside my colleague Ekkehard Ernst. Ekkehard is one of the founders and the president of the Geneva Macro Labs, and I am part of the executive board and served over the last years as head of stakeholder engagement. Now, we are very lucky, and I would also say privileged today to have two very special guests tonight with us who complement each other really well. So please welcome with me Cikay, manager in the international development team and lead of engagements in Africa at Ernst & Young, EY in Switzerland. Welcome, Cikay. Thank you for being with us tonight. And also warm welcome to you, Thierry, Watrin, Green Economy Advisor to the Ministry of State in Rwanda. Thank you for being with us. So before I introduce both of you properly, let me share our agenda with our audience. Our agenda tonight is straightforward. We have three, let's say 4 parts. At the beginning, we share a short welcome note and a short introduction about us as Geneva Macro Labs. And then we will be moving to our first speaker, Thierry Watrin, who will provide us with the bigger picture on the question of his experience in how to bring together government and private business for sustainable investment. And as a second speaker, we will have Cikay, who will give us a couple of really concrete examples, the practical implications of what Thierry will be sharing before. And yeah, that brings us now to a short introduction about Geneva Macro Labs. And let me share a few words about us. Just changing slides here. Up. So the Geneva Macro Labs, for those of you who are joining today for the first time, is a community-based think and do tank. We're based in Geneva, and we're focusing on harnessing the potential of emerging technologies for a more sustainable future. And we like to refer to ourselves as intellectual catalysts for best practices to achieve the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And we are living up to our mission by advocating for, but also advancing the development of sustainability-oriented innovation within an international and interdisciplinary community. What you can see here on the slide is a QR code. You can just make a photo with your mobile phone. It will bring you directly to our website. More precisely, it will bring you to our subpage that explains how you can get involved. We are community-based, so that means whoever is in support of accelerating the SDGs with emerging technologies and informing policymakers is more than welcome to join us as a member, but also in other functions. So please visit us online. Now, 2 little remarks on what our approach is to sustainable development. We offer at Geneva Macro Lab a multifaceted approach, supporting decision makers and other stakeholders to address global challenges. And our approach, I would say, is pretty unique, as we combine our experience in design thinking, collective intelligence, hackathons, system thinking, and agile development. And this is all supported by independent experts that are part of our greater ecosystem. We strive to include emerging technologies like blockchain or AI, where it is advancing the cause. So yeah, something I wanted to share with you as well is that just a few days ago, we held our annual General Assembly, where the idea of thematic working groups as Macro Labs was introduced. And with this new format, we offer our members the opportunity to bring their thematic focus and to Macro Labs, and they can benefit, you can benefit from our infrastructure and ecosystem to accelerate the translation from ideas into concrete solutions. So whether you are in human rights or you are in sustainable investment, we offer that space to have deeper conversations and see how we can accelerate each other's efforts. If this speaks to you, why not starting or joining a thematic working group on sustainable investment? So please, if you're interested, drop us a line, and we will be reaching out to you about the next steps. So this was already all I wanted to share about Macro Labs, and we now have the pleasure to move to our first speaker, to Thierry. Thierry Watrin. Let me just go to the right slide. Thierry, yeah, as I said, it's a pleasure to welcome you with us to our webinar. A few words about your background. Thierry is the Green Economy and Climate Change Advisor to the Minister of State in charge of economic planning for the Ministry of Finance and Economic Planning of Rwanda. And in this capacity, he contributes to the strategic development of a national green economy, and specifically working on the transition to a decarbonized, sustainable, and socially responsible economy. With more than 10 years of experience across finance and energy, Thierry brings cross-cutting perspectives to green economy and skills from high-level public and private sectors. And we benefited from his experience just last September when Thierry was one of our speakers at the Value Natural Capital Conference in Geneva. Last but not least, Thierry holds a master's degrees in central engineering, business, and in finance, along with an executive certificate in renewable energy management from the University of St. Gallen, Switzerland. All right, so Thierry, often we have heard in the last months, years about different approaches, how we can reduce our emissions, and it seems that a lot of times this is in conflict to local goals, or it would be undermined by the lack of financial resources that could that could endanger the viability of such projects. It seems that we are really now in need of a new sustainability paradigm that recognizes that we cannot continue business as usual, that we cannot just look at one side of the coin, but we need to have a broader view on the interconnectedness of the different sustainable development goals, but also of how we address the global challenges. Could you elaborate for us, as I said at the beginning, on the greater picture around sustainable investment? How, and you have this perspective by your experience, how can we actually bring the public and the private perspective together? And in particular, what does this mean for countries in the global south to benefit from new models of public-private partnerships? The floor is yours.
Thank you, Marianne. Can you hear me properly?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Excellent.
Yeah, but we don't see you. Your camera is not showing. At least I can't see you.
It's because I'm connected with my AirPods, but I can connect directly otherwise.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear and see you now.
Good, good. You know those kind of things that never happen 5 minutes before the meeting, but when we're live, obviously that happens. Yeah, creating triple win through sustainable development is one of the key issues that we recently see. I think you got the point. We need to make arbitrage and trade-off. And green investment is everything but an easy question. So in Rwanda, I will be talking about Rwanda because I know well the case of my country, but I could talk as well about East African country since my panelist and our dear panelist Cikay will be talking about the case of Tanzania as well. I think it's interesting to compare the two countries, but at the same time speak about the issues that we can have as African countries, sub-Saharan, on the development of a green economy and the climate finance strategy worldwide. So what we know is that Africa is polluting, is not polluting a lot, so it's not part of the problem, less than 3% of global GHG emission. However, Africa wants to be part of the solution. So there is a big need of climate financing, and you have a lot of countries that are in debt distress, and if not distress, in a kind of stress, like a lot of countries post COVID-19. As part of that, when as a country you need to develop and to propose a solution to a global warming problem, you need to be creative and innovative. So the first and a holistic approach would be to define a high-level planning agenda. So in Rwanda, for example, we developed the green growth and climate resilience strategy. We developed Vision 2050. I believe in some countries in Africa, you have a similar programs. And as well, you have the SDGs, you have the Africa Agenda 2030, the Africa We Want 2063, and there is a plan 2050 for the East Africa region as well. So the idea is to really mainstream climate change in those plans to make sure that we have targets. On top of that, you have the nationally determined contributions that most of the countries have applied and published on. And in the case of Rwanda, we engaged to reduce our GHG emission by 38% by the year of 2030. So what we do in the Ministry of Finance and Economic Planning, we do this strategic planning and we add the climate component. However, part of the mandate of the Ministry of Finance is to mobilize resources to finance the national priorities. And I was talking about the reduced fiscal space for most of the country like Rwanda after the recent external shocks on the economy. So you have the war in Ukraine, you have the global supply chain disruptions, you have holistic inflation that makes a very difficult access to highly concessional financing to support the recovering of the affected sector. So what does it mean? It means that as a country, you need to make the right decision. You need to make the investment, the sustainable investment, to create triple wins. The triple wins are multiplier effects, where when you put $1, you want to have a multiplier effect that maximize the profit for your society. There are several instruments that we're looking at to finance our transition, and the sustainability-linked bond is one of the instruments that thought of when you think about financing sustainable investments. So what's interesting is that it's a debt instrument, for example, that have a structural characteristic which is based on sustainability and ESG metrics. And you have a framework that provides a bit more flexibility than an orthodox green debt instrument. And the use of proceeds make that you just need to speak and to be able to publish on the KPIs that you defined with your investors that are linked to sustainability. The use of proceeds and the effect of those kind of sustainable investments are good for our economy. Why? Because one, it creates high qualitative jobs. We know that, for example, working in a hydropower station is better than working in a coal or in a pit mine for your health. We know that it's good for gender equality because in those kind of working space, the women are able to work at around 50%, and as well in terms of quality, because the education that our people will get from those kind of green investments will enable them to sell it not only to Rwanda, but to the whole Africa or to the whole world, because now you have hydro and wind power plants everywhere. So what we see and what we aim at is really to have an integrated approach to sustainable investment and to create triple wins through dollars invested and to maximize the profit. So that's a bit of what I wanted to share, and I will rebound on the questions and on the presentation of Cikay.
Excellent, thank you, Thierry, and I'm sure that the audience can't wait to share their questions. I should mention at this point that if you already have a question to share, please do so in the chat, and Ekkehard, who will be moderating the Q&A part of our webinar tonight, will then provide you with the space and the floor to ask a question, or he might summarize as well, depending on the numbers that are coming in. Thank you, Thierry. That was really insightful. I'm looking forward to our discussion. I'm giving the floor now to Cikay. Let me share my screen again for our slides. Go. All right, Cikay, you are manager in the international development team in Africa at Ernst & Young, as I've already mentioned. Very interesting as well, I found, is that you are the former executive director of the European Business Group, Tanzania, where you have successfully implemented a turnaround while building a platform for your board of top business leaders to encourage the increase of commerce between your country, between Tanzania and Europe. And if my sources were correct, nearly 1.3 billion euros in trade has already occurred between the two regions, which is quite an impressive number. You are a recognized female leader, and I encourage everyone here to follow you as Thierry on social media, because I feel your posts are very insightful and inspiring. And last but not least, I want to mention that you have a Master of Philosophy. You were focusing on international peace studies. That's a short spotlight of some highlights of your biography, but I think most importantly for tonight, for our discussion today, is that your experience includes working with governments, but also understanding what the private sector is capable to do and what the private sector is interested in. We just heard from Thierry already a couple of examples on how sustainable investment in practice could look like with sustainability-linked bonds, for instance. Could you elaborate a little bit more on concrete examples of how, in particular, how the private sector could help with the sustainable transformation? What is the role of sustainable investment?
Thank you very much, Marianne. I hope everybody can hear me all right. I think that the private sector has a huge role to play, particularly in the PPP section. However, before that could happen, there needs to be a lot of changes on both sides, both government and the private sector. When we do look at, following on to Thierry's point on sort of climate and climate financing, when you do look at current discussions, for example, with this COP27, you realize that the amount in discussion for investment is in the trillions. There's quite a lot of money being discussed in terms of the investment climate investment discussions. However, in discussion for Africa in particular is concentrated on the loss and damage phase. The loss and damages for climate. However, when you do look at the amount of this, it's in the millions, right? It does not account for, it is in the 0 point. It's less than 1% of the amount in discussion for investment. So you already see that it's not a level playing field in this case. And as we do talk about money being put in to resolve certain challenges or problems, we do need to have that understanding that the LDCs, or in this particular angle, Africa is not receiving a fair package on it. And what are we meant to be looking at when we're looking at investment, for example, in this small part of climate? Well, the guys who cause the biggest problems or the biggest national problem get a bigger package, and the guys who get the biggest effects of the problems caused by the bigger guys are told to sit over there and discuss about the less than 1% of the best amount. Africa needs to be brought to the table, and it needs to be part of the main discussions into the investment climate. And as we talk about this, we do need to have equal games between government and the private sector. And when we talk about the private sector, we talk about sort of foreign investment into a region, or in this particular case, Africa. And access to finance is important. So if an investor is coming in with a certain package, we're meant to have a PPP with the government also needs to have the funding for that investment. But we all know that there is a lot of limitations to access to finance for African governments, for example, but also for low middle income countries or LDCs. When we do look at issues coming through like the Ukraine, the issue for Greece, there was the speed at which the international community supported these countries was fairly high. Then you come and look at countries like Zimbabwe and the issues going on, and Sri Lanka, and how long it's taking to have a solution in comparison to the solutions that were designed for Ukraine. So when you have African countries or LDCs looking to access investment, the system is limited. The terms and conditions are quite limiting. And you have, yes, the terms are good in terms of percentage, 0.5 is fairly good, but the restrictions and the contents is different. The setup in which the international infrastructure financial system was set, the context has changed. Since then, it's changed. And governments now have a say in what they want to invest in and how they want to invest in it. The lending percentage is good. However, the restrictions are limiting to governments because they have to do what they're told to do with the money that they receive. They're forced to go borrow elsewhere. And the borrowing of elsewhere is fairly expensive. It's at well over 10%. So if you're borrowing for a country at over 10%, it's fairly high. The cost of borrowing becomes really high, which means they're not able to bring to the table the same amount as the counterparts would. That causes, again, another challenge. Then when you look at this, you also have the lack of capacity for many governments to have a fair advantage at the review, for example, of contracts, where there's a huge investment of sort of capacity from the Western end into reviewing of these major big contracts, which require heavy investment of capacity, yet there's very little investment in the same capacity for example, African countries. For lack of a better word, the review and assessment of the footnotes of the terms and conditions have also led to countries signing off or signing on the bad end of the deal. And we've seen this happen with many multilaterals who've gone into a country, signed on, and the country was supposedly getting quite a lot of money, but actually the best end of the deal was with the private sector or with the country exporting. This has happened, it has made possible by both sides, private sector not being fairly honest with the footnotes, or also government not clearly having the capacity to read the footnotes or the terms and conditions or the full deal, having a proper view of the full deal. And in the same has created distrust. So we've seen it happen in many countries. We've seen it happen even within our countries in East Africa. And the perception of distrust has a huge effect between the two. So the private sector is here to milk, and repatriate all the findings back to the West. And the same, the private sector is saying, well, the government is not giving us a fair deal, and it's, the lack of trust has also hindered PPP agreements, and it affects it hugely. So again, we talk about trust, but we also move on to sense of high risk. Africa, in this case, East Africa as well, is highly classified as high risk, in any sort of investment conversation, in any review or due diligence, investment in Africa is high risk. Now, the one thing that I question on this is, unless and until Africa is brought to the table as an equal partner of PPPs will continue to struggle. Unless governments are reviewed as equal partners and not just a facilitator of a PPP, this process of engagement, this process of business will continue to struggle. So we are seeing that the risk in investing in Africa is classified as high, yet Africa has the highest return of investment. Not sure why this perception of risk is there. And I'm sure for those that have worked in Africa, understand perception in Africa, or investors even in Africa, will really back me on what I say. And I also echo the same words said by His Excellency President of Kenya, His Excellency President Ruto, who also echoed the same things like last week, saying we do not understand why we are classified as high risk, yet the return of investment is even higher. So when these classifications are happening and when this is the sense, PPPs will struggle, investment will struggle, government agreements, and the same with the private sector will struggle. And to add to that as well, for our governments, there needs to be a sustainable business environment. There need for investment, anyone working in the sector is not an NGO. No one is looking to donate. Everybody is looking to, make a profit. It's a business at the end of the day. Government should profit. Private sector should profit. There needs to be a win-win for both sides. For this to happen, there also needs to be a facilitation of a good business environment to happen. And this really sits with a stable policy environment, expectation, understanding of the rules of engagement, right? Advocacy on the terms of trade, terms of investment, investment facilitation. It's not enough to promote investment, and this is really for the African governments. It's not enough to promote that we are a good investment destination. What happens after the investment is done? What happens with the facilitation? Who looks after this section and this end of it? Also, we need to also understand the ease of doing business. I know the report is cancelled, and I'm not reflecting onto the report, but rather the action and the ease of doing business in itself. PPPs are business oriented. They're meant to profit one or the other. They're meant to work to develop the offering that it is set at. When we do have a good business environment, a facilitating business environment that is not bottlenecked with policy changes, with legal restrictions, with challenges in simple things like setting up a business. In East Africa, I think it's only Rwanda who can say it takes what, a couple of days, Thierry, or hours? Please correct me.
6 hours to open a business.
That's a miracle in our context, right? We do know that in many East African countries, in Tanzania, it's fairly a good amount of time, it's now and, good months. In Kenya, the same as Uganda. This is just East Africa comparative. Not many African countries or disease could offer the same. It takes 6 hours to be up and running as a business. That being said, investors need to understand the landscape as to which they are looking to operate in. From my experience, every investor that went through our door, one thing we said was, do your due diligence. It is absolutely imperative to do your due diligence, not once, not twice, but thrice, really. Ensure that you have the right information for the right move that you're about to make. Mistakes in Africa are costly, unlike in Europe, where, I'm comparing Europe, right? Because it's an area that I worked in. A wrong setup of an institution will be met with, please change this aspect of your company, of your business, to reflect the right ways to doing business, and 1, 2, 3, 4. A wrong setup, for example, in a place like Tanzania, will result in either you having to close your business because you have gone against the law, right? The repercussions of this are higher. And their cost, it's really high to the business as well, which could mean either your tax setup or your investment in the business or your compliancy, right, to operate is all set wrong. So that would affect your business and how you do business going forward. You do not want to even try and say, okay, fine, I'll close this and set it up afresh. Closing a business is even more difficult than setting it up. So you need to have an understanding of the landscape. You need to have a clear understanding of who, the area you're working to work with, who you're working with as well. And another thing that we see quite a lot in this type of projects, investors, and in this case for the investment side, they are making moves in a different way than they would back home. And this could either be triggered with a concept of, it's Africa, every man for himself and God for us all, right? It's a scrum competition, so you have to do what you can. And at this point, I used to label them cowboys, because you come in and there's no rule of law. The assumption is there's no rule of law and we can do whatever. And this has happened to so many. And it ended up supporting quite a few who have set up in a sense that assuming the rule of law somewhat does not exist, so we will also follow on to things that are not quite conventional. And this does cost at the end of the day. When compliance, it does not. When your business is not compliant, the cost to your business is higher than otherwise. So I say to investors, why do they do certain things in Africa that they would never do in Europe? When you're looking to go into business, due diligence is one of the first things everybody would do, right? Investment is one of the first things. Know your partner, know who you're getting into business with. Understand simple things like culture and time. I say when you're doing business in Europe or in the West, time of doing business is literally on end. You look to understand that, okay, I'll set up my business in 6 months, I will have this in 10 months, I will have, I'll be in sort of return mode of investment in 2 years, this business will be able to give us returns in whatever period of time. In Africa, I say multiply that by 2. The cost of time is high. Things don't move as fast or as efficiently as you'd want them to do. Mm-hmm. So having this understanding is important as well for things like this, the cultural aspect, the time, in terms of time as an investment into your business is also important. So maybe I should stop here and allow Thierry to continue saying something into it.
Thank you, Cikay. I think that was so interesting, and I already got some golden nuggets out of your call actually for diligence on all sides, actually not only understanding the landscape, but then acting upon that understanding. So I would like to move to the question and answer part, to the Q&As of tonight's event. It will be Ekkehard who will be moderating, and I already can see that the first question is in the chat, so I'm handing over to Ekkehard, and then we'll go with the flow.
Yeah, thanks Marianne, and thanks to Cikay and Thierry for these excellent points. I mean, as you said, Marianne, I won't hold you all back from your questions, and I will immediately jump to Sarah, who had a question. Sarah, do you want to unmute yourself and ask the question directly?
Yes, thanks, Ekkehard. Yes, a question for Thierry. I would be interested to know your opinion about nature performance bonds, which are not so much, or not actually at all, use of proceed bonds, but rather linked to KPI, so as the name says, to nature related KPIs. It's a pretty new instrument and evolving, and I was wondering if it's something you are considering in Rwanda. Thank you.
Sorry, over to you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. It was, I did not see, it was Sarah who asked the question.
Yes. Yeah.
Hi, Sarah. Yeah, thank you for the question. A very interesting one. And actually, yes, that's part of the things we're looking at, because when you're in such squeeze, a fiscal squeeze, especially for African countries, and adding, and I'm sure Cikay will connect and agree with that, that part of our debt of our African country are in dollars. And given that the dollar hit a 20 years high last year, it means that the amount we need to repay of debt and of interest is soaring. So the pressure is even higher structurally. We're looking at other solutions, and the fact that in Africa, the way we developed and the way we are developing is taking into account the nature and biodiversity conservation. What we do is that we want to put a price on our biodiversity. So a lot of people say that there is no price on biodiversity. That's wrong. There's a price. The price currently is zero. Just that you can come, destroy a forest or get animals and go with them for a zero price and make business on that. So the idea is, how do we put a price on biodiversity? How do we put a price on carbon? How do we put a price, a negative externality on business and behavior that impacts negatively Earth and our global environment? From that comes the possibility of exploring wildlife conservation financing instruments. And the biodiversity conservation bond is an interesting instrument. Why? Because it's a non-debt instrument. So not only it's based on KPIs in the use of proceeds, it's a bit technical, but the use of proceeds is how will you use the money when you enter the bond. The question is as well, how much of debt can you take, and how fast you can deliver on your project so that it doesn't stay too long on your balance sheet, because otherwise you have the risk to have a worse credit rating, which is already quite high post COVID-19. So the answer is yes. I think not only Rwanda, but I think I believe a few developing and emerging market countries are looking at for such solutions. The interest is that it's a non-debt instrument, because it would be a development partner, for example, in South Africa with the Rhino bond. It was the World Bank who are taking the charge of the debt and doing the interface between the investors and the state, which is the implementing agency. And in the case of South Africa, the KPI was a KPI, the key performance indicator, was the number of rhinos and how it increased. So it's a positive nature finance instrument. The KPI makes sense. The fact that it's non-debt is actually an asset for countries, especially given the stress that we have currently on our debt. So yes, my answer is yes. And not only Rwanda, I believe a lot of countries are looking how to make it and how to make it have sense. The case of South Africa and the Rhino bond is a good example on how we can make it happen.
Thanks, Thierry. I mean, I know this was a question specifically to you, but Cikay, do you have any views on this? I mean, how can this be helpful maybe also in Tanzania?
I think it could be very helpful if implemented. I see that for the case of Tanzania, it's still being led by the UN and the UN agencies that are looking to, for example, the biodiversity finance. So this conversation is still being led highly by the UN, and I'm not seeing it being led by government. We've only kind of legislated on carbon credits, and that's a step towards the right direction. However, the nature bonds, we're not yet there, and I think it is something definitely in consideration. The push is there. The understanding of the importance is also there. However, it is not something that we're noting that the government is particularly pushing yet, but I think it's definitely in the making. And or maybe it is, and my understanding is a bit low on that.
Okay, we have a new, here we go. Simona, you had a question as well. Maybe you want to unmute as well and ask your question directly.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. Hi, Cikay.
Hi, Simona.
Hi. I was wondering, but then you said that you might not have enough visibility into it, so I'm not sure if you will have an answer to this, but what I was wondering is what would be efficient ways to motivate governments to actually look a little bit more into the future and consider more sustainable investments, because I've attended the EU-Tanzanian Investment Forum, and a lot of the investments are really focused on now and large investments. There's not so much interest in actually preserving the environment, or I feel like there's not so much understanding of the richness of the and environmental richness that is there to protect it, at least not as heavy as we are already focusing on in Europe.
I'm glad you attended the European Investment Forum. It took quite a good years to organize, and it finally happened. But I think it's not correct that government is not looking into it. The government is, but rather it's the sense of profitability. What is the interest of the investors? A lot of investors are not necessarily looking into that. So it's not an offering that comes to the table fairly often, in a sense that there needs to be an understanding, right? When we talk about climate and we talk about sort of investment into climate and nature, we also need to understand, again, culture, context, and the local understanding. You talk about, for example, I'll give you an example. We talk about charcoal and how it leads to deforestation and the number of households. I think it's about, is it 12,000 or 2,000 trees per household at this point going down? However, we do understand the effects of, use of this fuel, cooking fuel, but also we need to understand that this is the only sort of method that most people have in terms of firewood as a fuel, cooking fuel. But when we tell them to stop cutting trees or to stop using firewood, to stop using charcoal, what is the alternative? Is it affordable? I was part of a group that made it to the refugee camps in Tanzania to understand cooking gas, cooking sort of solutions, because there was a lot of deforestation in around the refugee camps in Tanzania, and there was bringing a lot of friction between the host community and the refugee community. And in part of this research to understand, yes, we do not want deforestation to happen. We want to have more investment in sustainable, sort of environmental friendly investments. First, there's very little going on in that in terms of foreign investors looking to invest in the sector, but also the alternatives are fairly not there yet. They're not fairly developed to cater for the needs of those. You're looking at a household that is under $1. The cost of purchase of gas, sort of, for them to use maybe not charcoal, but gas. The gas itself, the smallest container, I think it costs about $15,000. How is this household going to afford to change to a more either cleaner energy or to better, not necessarily cleaner, but better? They are forced to go back to charcoal. For the case of the refugees, as much as there was sort of move and push towards using more sort of environmental friendly cooking fuels and more better energy reserve, we found out that they were being given sort of peas that took 9 hours to cook. How much gas can you use to cook 9 hours? Peas, to boil peas for 9 hours. So we also need to understand the full circle of this investment, not just the don't do this, there's less push towards sort of investment in climate or preservation of our environment and that, but there needs also to be an alternative that is of affordable alternative. At the moment, we're seeing a lot of initiatives towards using more, sorry, I need to recollect my thoughts, to use more, and initiatives to use sort of environmentally friendly, not coal, but
It's like it's pellets, right, or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But they're also made from dirt or from reuse of certain materials. So they're more environmentally friendly, but also they supposedly cook better. The cost is still high. You know, people buy a bag of charcoal for less than $6, and a bag of that is 20 to 50 kilos, right? And that takes them for a whole month. Yet a small bag of 5 kilos worth of this new type of cooking fuel costs double that amount. So there needs to be an understanding of that environment and what that environment needs to then, you know, make investments towards that. But as we talk about investment, I can tell you there's very little, for example, in my time, and I'm not sure if my colleagues or my people that have taken over from me could also say that I never facilitated an investment on an environment, for example. Very few, fine between came to my table. So there isn't that major push for interest. I don't know, maybe it's about return or it's about the sector in itself that it's not fully developed to actually get better returns of investment for it.
Excellent, thanks. We have another question from Anam, and just to both of you. So maybe Anam, you want to come in here and ask the question?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Ekkehard. Hi, everyone. I can't help but wonder, like, there are a lot of countries, especially developing countries, they have a lot of mental instability. And when we have a pressing matters of like an urgency around climate change and environmental challenges, what are your guys' thoughts about managing just these projects, these sustainability projects, and ensuring that the investment does not fly away? I hope I'm more clear, for lack of better words.
Did you get the question, Thierry? It's also in the chat.
Yeah, I'm not sure I heard well, but I was able to read it. Yeah, I think I'll respond to both Anan and it was Stephanie question. Simona, sorry, so almost the same. Simona's question. Yeah, I think it's not because we don't see results that the countries are not doing the work. And if you look actually on the participation in COP27 and in climate summits, you will see a lot of African countries and especially East African community countries participating to the discussion on sustainable investment, on climate, and how to unlock climate finance, because not all the countries are on the same level. And for some countries, we're still talking about unlocking access to international climate finance. And you have a list of checkpoints to tick. And you have some countries that are in advance, some countries that are following as part of South-South collaboration, and others that are still trying to understand how to have the keys. So I can respond to Anand's question as well by another question. How is it that countries that are ready are not yet given the carrot So you have countries that have done everything: country climate development report, nationally determined contribution, reduction of GHG already as part of their GHG emission as part of their NDCs, and they're still struggling to have the case for concessional finance, for private sector investment, because as Cikay said, the African premium, the African perceived risk is so high that it's difficult to attract international investors because of the imaginative narrative that if you invest in Africa, you lose your money. So even doing our homework, it's still difficult to attract investors and to make the case for a global concessional climate finance to fund our transition. So I think it's in both cases that we need to look not only from the developed country point of view, but understanding as well that a lot of actually developing countries and emerging markets are doing the job.
Thank you, Thierry. Cikay, you want to come in as well?
No, I think Thierry has covered it fairly well.
Excellent. Okay, Dennis has raised a hand. So Dennis, do you want to come in? And the last, that would be the last.
Yeah.
Tonight.
Yeah. Just wanted to share that last year, end of November, I worked with UNDP as a consultant for the Tanzania SDG Investment Forum. So it was a 1 day, actually 2 days in total. I brought 14 investors, 5 individuals there who actually took the flight and went to have meetings, and then remaining online. And 2 profiles, one investing in the projects, startups or, the early stage. And the 3 of them who were there physically were there to bring their businesses, investing in the country. So even if that was a UNDP investment forum, we had a lot of trouble to have one-to-one meetings there with the investors. They could not able, and it was UNDP event together with the UNDP Tanzania and TIC, the Tanzania Investment Center. And still, one investor was ready to sign the MOU the evening, and then to really go into the discussions how it's going to continue on the food security, which was a very important point for Tanzania. Another one was insurance, another one was health. And then, but we could not go further. So I managed to find a way, and then still discussions are continuing. We are in May, and still we are talking about NDAs. And one of them is not even responding. And the same thing happens with the funds I brought from US funds investing in Africa, and still discussions are continuing, not because of the due diligence, it's because of the lack of action and slowness in one way. So my question is help me to understand. I was not the only one who brought the investors. There were a lot of investors, international investors I was responsible for. I bring them, and so far discussions are happening, but I don't have a track record. I say, this investment happened because of the what I mean, this situation that I don't understand, why. So,
Denise, I truly understand your position, and I have been in your position at many times. Unfortunately, I cannot comment for the government in why they are slow to respond. What I can comment on is my first comment that I made, that understanding the culture and the process on how things work. So if you are planning your investment plan, that this will take 2 months, multiply that by 2 or 3 times in Africa. And this is not just for Tanzania, it's for many parts of East Africa. And maybe Rwanda is a little bit different at this point, but I think it came from there before. So we in Africa, things happen a little bit slower than we would like. We would like initially, right? And bureaucracy is a problem. And in many places, it is a problem. But honestly, I thought there was bureaucracy in Africa and things were slow in Africa until I tried to get something done in France. Then I realized that France invented the word bureaucracy. So I've learned. So this happens in both places and in many places as well. However, I am happy to support you if you could get my contacts and details. We could review what happened, what is happening, and if there is any way to get things moving for you in understanding how we could best support the investors. I think there's a lot of, we cannot deny bureaucracy in.
Yeah, but I don't understand. We are not talking about the bureaucracy with the government. You know, I went through that already.
Okay.
Is the company itself.
So you're looking to form, maybe we could take this conversation.
Yeah, maybe I send a request LinkedIn to connect. So maybe we can have a chat. Yeah,
Maybe
because
that would be better.
Yeah, because we invest in we are going now to Uganda. We are going to go to Kenya, Rwanda. You know, with the health company. Okay. And then I really want to understand, you know, what's going on. So that, yeah.
Yeah. Maybe you can give us the last insight on this, and then I hand it back over to Marianne.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry?
I said maybe you can give us the last insight on what needs to be done. You know, I mean, it seems that Rwanda is a bit ahead of the curve when it comes to bureaucracy in East Africa, both at the government and the corporate level. So maybe you can give us some last insights on this, and then I hand it back over to Marianne.
Yeah, I believe that Cikay said it right. It's not that obvious and that easy to build a bureaucracy that makes sense. And actually in Rwanda, what we're trying to do is to give back a positive meaning of bureaucracy. That bureaucracy can be good, it needs to be well organized and paperless and structured, but it takes time. If you look 40 or 50 years ago, and I'm sure the oldest and the older person will agree with me, the public administration, even in developed countries, were not that fast. Today it's fast in developed countries, and you would expect the same coming in developing country, but that's quite recent, actually. So if you let a few more years to some countries to develop, that are the countries that are young as well, I'm sure that if we speak about it in 5, 10, or 15 years, it will be completely different and digitalized. And so on. So as well, I think we need to be understanding on the fact that not all the countries go at the same speed, but at the same time, we know where we want to go. And always remember about the high perceived risk I was talking about, because that's a reality. And the World Bank has done an interesting report on that that showed the Africa premium. Actually, that there is a perceived risk as well from investor, and that's why it's so difficult. So there are many nuances, I would say, in the approach to investment in Africa. But yeah, I believe that we're following the right way, and I'm happy that in Rwanda we're following a first-class business approach. Just to lead the way and as well to exchange, because the end goal is really to make a peer-to-peer exchange with developing countries and African countries to share about how we can do it best in our way as well.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Thierry. Thanks for these wise words. And with that, I mean, thanks again to both of you for sharing these insights with our audience. And I hand it back to Marianne.
Thank you, Ekkehard. A big thank you to both of you, Thierry and Cikay. And thank you also for everyone who was participating in the discussion. I prepared the last point, which actually was to ask you for a final statement, but I think given the time that we reached now, I would skip that. And I think the last words of you, Thierry, and also your deliberations, Cikay, they summarized well your point of view of how we can actually lead the way to a functioning business and governance landscape that would allow for sustainable investment. So at the final point, I would love to invite you to our next event, which will happen on Wednesday, May 17th. So in 2 weeks from now, we will be hosting in close collaboration with our dear partner Just Jobs Network an event on global perspectives on the future of work. So our series, so to say, on global perspectives is continuing with a different focus, this time on the future of work. And most likely our event on the 17th will be a hybrid event. So I would kindly ask you to follow us on social media, sign up for our newsletter, or simply visit our website so that you are not missing out on additional information to follow. And with that, I am celebrating each participant and each insight that we have discussed tonight, and I wish you all, in the name of the entire team, a wonderful rest of the day, and I hope we can welcome you soon again. So thank you, and bonsoir, bonne soirée de Genève. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.